Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just reiterate that it's you're speaking with Louise, myself, Maud, and Martin today. Um, and I suppose we just wanted to start by saying thank you for hosting us today, and to those of you who have attended. We're really excited to be part of the PDU's learning series and to be talking to you today about the systems pressure work that has been evolving in Sussex. We're looking forward to some rich discussion on this. So part of the, I suppose, magic of speaking to you today is in creating resonance with colleagues in Nottingham and nationally, who are thinking about really these evergreen concerns and challenges over sustainability, data, cost, and meaningful systems change for the services that support people experiencing multiple disadvantage. And we're here to do that by showcasing the pressure mapping approach that's emerging in the Changing Futures Sussex team and partnership there, and then discuss the implications for the wider system. We'll also explore some of the systems thinking theory that runs through the entirety of the work. So what was originally the swim lanes work to the newer pressure mapping, which we believe helps reframe our more traditional approaches to cost and complexity. So the hope is that we can think collectively about how this approach can be adapted to fit local service need and where it can continue to evolve. So I'll just talk to you very quickly about Making Every Adult Matter, so MEME, where I work, and how we fit into this work as a piece of the national puzzle. So for those of you who don't know, MEME is a national charity supporting practitioners, policymakers, and experts with lived and living experience to transform services and systems for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. And we do this in part with our partnership work, as well as our network, and a real focus on systems change. So we work to this model, which you can see to the right, called the MEME approach, which considers 7 principles which can be adapted to local need. So at MEME, we believe that when these 7 are in place and embedded locally, they are indicators of a healthy system. So part of our work and why I'm speaking to this subject today is that MEME provides support to the Changing Futures program as the national learning partner. And part of this includes a regular learning community, which Louise runs, as well as a subgroup data learning community for the Changing Futures areas, in which a lot of the work we'll talk to you about today has been shared and supported. So I just wanted to reference that. I've also put some links to our network, which if you're in Nottingham, you all have access to, and there's lots of resources on there. So if you would like more information, please reach out to me. But relevant to today, we put the meetings and notes from those learning communities on the network. And I thought this might be a helpful reference because it shows a bit of the narrative of how data experts are convening nationally around these evergreen problems on data. I had the privilege of working with Louise and Martin and the teams in Sussex, especially in the beginning, around the systems pressure mapping. So I'll run you through how that work has evolved and then hand you over to Louise to talk about the systems thinking and where we're at now. So the systems mapping work in Sussex was initially called swim lanes. And it aspired to quantify or demonstrate high system use for across services in Sussex for people experiencing SMD or multiple compound needs, as it's known in Sussex. So we wanted to develop an approach to monitoring the use of public services and really seek clarity on prevention opportunities that didn't feel reactive or retroactive. And by prevention, I mean, we are talking about looking at patterns of unplanned and planned interventions to try and get ahead of a crisis and support someone, like an individual person. So in essence, we used swim lanes through a costings lens, which can help show that money spent upfront in one part of the system can then create a more positive impact elsewhere in the system. And we're able to explore the strain on that public service in a more granular detail. And there's a full methodology which we wrote on this with lots of future objectives and ways that the work could develop. And it's listed on the Changing Futures Sussex website, which I've linked here. And it's definitely worth a read if you're interested. I think I just wanted to bring out one of the main objectives, which we felt was important, which is around how to continue to consider beneficiary experience and voice, and how to truly incorporate that seamlessly into swim lanes and our costings approaches. So the past, I suppose, 2 years for many of the changing futures areas, and indeed many local areas nationally, the focus has been on sustainability and really finding a home for multiple disadvantaged work locally. And I think quite often this conversation inevitably turns to cost. And so a lot of areas have embarked on the costings work with the goal of making the case that work being done in a delivery team will save money to some part of the system. So these are quite critical tools at the moment, the cost avoidance analyses. They are used to answer really difficult questions posed by our local service landscape. So questions around commissioning, reduced budgets, restrictions, and the like. So as in the beginning during swim lanes, as the team embarked on the costings calculations, these limitations jumped out quite quickly. So we understand that doing an overall cost benefit analysis often doesn't yield the results that we'd like. And this is because part of working with people experiencing severe multiple disadvantage, as you know, is supporting people to access the right support. So in that first year or two of working in a person-centered way and building up trust, it means that maybe that person is linked in with services that they hadn't been before. So the cost increases because that person is known or visible to those services. A great example of that is people getting into safe and appropriate housing. So we know that that costs money, and we expect the cost to increase with the right housing. And arguably, we should welcome this cost of getting someone the right housing. So we might call that a planned cost. However, a person experiencing a crisis who attends A&E urgently, this could be called an unplanned cost. So the weight, if you will, of a cost differs. And then I suppose another limitation is, and kind of what we're describing, is that looking at fiscal or financial cost alone doesn't accurately describe the experience of what it feels like to interact with a service for the person experiencing it, or the pressure that that service feels. And it goes very little of the way to paint a picture of the relationship building. So what it feels like to really work with someone and build up trust and work in that person-centered way. And it certainly doesn't show decision makers how working in that way feels different. So yeah, that's the tension. So how do we contend with the fact that cost avoidance tools are needed and are useful, but that they have these quite severe limitations? And how do we wrap all of that nuance and understanding into an output that decisions will be made on? And yeah, that's really the tension that we're grappling with. And I think philosophically, it might feel like a really interesting one, but practically, every day in a service with real budgets and real people, do services have time to grapple with this, like the meaning of it? And I think Sussex figured this out pretty quickly and took a both and approach. So thinking about the financial cost to the system and calculating where reductions are happening and telling a narrative story about a person's experience. And then we started looking at not just the journey mapping of a person, but measuring that pressure that is felt in services and in the system. So that's sort of the evolution. And so I suppose just to show you the national picture, there's a lot of areas that are working quite aspirationally around this. So the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, I would say a lot of the actual like cost crunching work derives from the work that GMCA did. They created the cost benefit analysis methodology and a spreadsheet of national unit costings. So a unit cost meaning a GP visit costs X amount of pounds typically. And I think the GMCA database is widely recognized as the best estimate that we have of those national costs. which of course differ depending on location, but it is the strongest national database that we have. We've got the data learning group, which I mentioned earlier, which is really grappling with the tensions I described, sharing good practice and collaborating and sharing ideas and resources in a way that feels really relational and trusting. So working across the 15 changing futures areas. And then I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas that are doing really great work kind of around this. So Changing Futures Northumbria, they pioneered an in-depth investigation of a couple individuals experiencing multiple disadvantage. And for one particular individual, it was shown that he cost the local system a minimum of £1 million. And they continue to do a huge amount of work and research around their liberated method and are absolutely worth looking into. Changing Futures Nottingham, as many of you on the call may know, have had huge success in working with the integrated data set. And Changing Futures Leicester is piloting the systems pressure tool and the approach that Louise and Martin will speak to you about today, and developing systems change results bespoke to the challenges in Leicester and really meeting this work with curiosity. So all of this is to say that there feels like there is momentum towards this work or towards working kind of aspirationally, and there's lots of resources out there. And I suppose this is my sort of like impact slide. So this is to say that this is more than just pockets of like pretty phenomenally good work. It is having an impact nationally, and national government have a stake in this type of work. So the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is interested not only in the cost avoidance work, but in the ways that Changing Futures areas are working differently around data, journey mapping and sustainability. Some of you may know there's also the dedicated £100 million in the community help partnerships to support adults experiencing multiple disadvantage over the next 3 years. And then we've got the local government outcomes framework. So a key aspect of this for us is better outcomes for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. And all of this feels related to the systems pressure mapping work in the sense that we are thinking about what metrics would most accurately describe the experience of a person experiencing SMD. And I brought up the meme approach earlier. As we at meme have considered what is required to indicate a healthy system, and that feels like two sides of the same coin. So the work we're thinking about today is related to, is informed by and informing some of the wider national work. So before I hand you over to Louise, I just wanted to pause to say that really what we're trying to do today is to find some resonance with you and your work locally. So if, as you listen, if anything sticks out as interesting, or if you feel like someone else might benefit from having this discussion, please note it down. I'm also incredibly mindful that I've really swung us through a lot of information for the sake of time. So please get in touch with me if you think any of that would be relevant to your work. I'm sure any of us would be happy to facilitate further discussion. So I'll just hand you over to Louise to talk about where the work has evolved from swim lanes and the systems theories that underpin everything. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to start off with this diagram here, just looking at the way that we work in the system and some of the deep thinking that's gone in with myself and colleagues around really the system doesn't quite work in the way that we want it to and why that is. And it's really, in my view, is down to the language we use in metrics. Quite often what we end up trying to do is to keep ourselves in something in the system that's predictable and it's known. And so we have a reductionist approach to metrics where we set up pilot projects where there's a beginning and an end and it's clear, and we measure that. And the problem is that that gets us into the weeds straight away, especially when we're talking about multiple compound need. Where we get sort of things that start working is more in that complex environment where we're able to sort of share, we're able to collaborate, and we can innovate at the same time. and sort of developing prototypes rather than pilots in sort of continuous improvement and iteration is really a way where we need to sort of move to. When we do this, it becomes a little bit more unpredictable, unknown, and we need to really be centering ourselves around trust. And then there's the sort of, when you get further out into the system, then everything sort of becomes more and more chaotic as you lose sight of the way that you can measure success and sort of measure progress and so on. So there's a kind of balance to be had through sort of really understanding the tension between predictable and known into unpredictable and unknown. And the work that we've done in Sussex is really trying to bridge ourselves and sit in the complex in order to understand this. And as Mulder said, a big shout out really to Northumbria for the inspiration to begin this work. And there are lots of other people that are having similar thoughts as well. But we've been able to work with this with the way that the program's been set up. So we know the problem here, the sort of Marmot review and other sort of bits of work where despite the overwhelming effort poured into short-term fixes, it remains trapped, the system, and it's episodic. So we keep going in this revolving door. And for those of you who've been here, working in the system for many years, this is really, really very familiar stuff. We're setting up a crisis episode, we're assessing, then we're intervening, then we case close because we're moving something through a simple sort of system, then there's a relapse and people sort of come back round. The pressure map tool that we've developed is a way of trying to look at this process in a slightly different way. And it was one thing that I wanted to do about bringing something in that we can use fairly democratically at pace. But the tension that we have is around the ability to share and receive data. I spoke with Gavin Roberts some time ago from Meme around the idea around the common mess that people end up in terms of the system, and you can see there the familiar multiple disadvantage, the multiple compound needs, sort of things around housing, poverty, criminal justice, mental health, and so on. I really like this quote on the right hand side, although I can't quite remember where I got it from. But working as a system steward feels nebulous and abstract at best of times. Often it can feel like knitting fog. And I just like that idea of the way that we're trying to manifest sort of services in a complex society. That's very much what it can feel like for many. And a lot of people don't really have the time to really sort of step out of that mess, because you may be funded by housing or criminal justice or mental health with their own drivers for what they want to see and what they want to expect. And this is what develops sort of silos. And of course, what happens in that sort of idea is that the people facing multiple disadvantage are working in that complex way. And so the success rate of people in our services is fairly low, we would argue, as a result of that system chaos that we end up putting into our sort of notes and writing as somebody living the chaotic lifestyle. But actually, when you helicopter out and you look at the system, you kind of think, well, actually the system is really chaotic in of itself. In some of the work that I've done, I've sort of used, forgot I had that little animation that was around something, forget that happened. But the idea I thought around how do you describe this, because one of the things about systems change, I suppose, is actually sharing knowledge and getting people to sort of comprehend things. So I do think that what we lack is comprehension. And just before this meeting started, we were talking about the idea around going to a meeting where someone would say, well, we'll take silence as agreement. Actually, generally that means we take silence as we don't really understand what's going on. So there's several analogies of this, and people might have sort of seen this type of thing. But if you imagine, the system as a bowl of fruit, you've got some certainty. That's a pear, that's an apple, there are some grapes. But it becomes sort of volatile and complex and ambiguous. VUCA, for anybody that knows that particular acronym, is that we're now living in a more volatile, complex and ambiguous sort of landscape. where we end up with this sort of soup bowl of uncertainty, and that's kind of where we're coming from. So how do you start pulling those ingredients out and start making sense of it across a wide system? The other thing that I've really sort of landed on as well is this idea of metric infallibility. Now Eric Hognagel is a guy that's done this idea about work as imagined, work as prescribed, so what would be commissioned, work as done, and then work as disclosed. And all of these are system failure points. So we have an idea as a commissioner that this is how this is going to happen, and we can draw a plot and a plan, and it all comes out, it all works really, really well. That's in our heads. And then actually, when you move over to work as done, it's different. Clients will receive that differently. And then work is disclosed when it comes back into the system as learning is often not correct. And there are several sort of philosophers. I won't sort of bang on about them too much, but in the notes you will see Sidney Dekker and Stephen Shorrock talking about the same kind of thing around the disconnect between efficiency and effectiveness and those types of things. So that's a kind of basis that I'm coming from when I start doing this work. The other thing that we really notice as well is that we're using lagging metrics. And when I did a search for lagging metrics in health systems, I didn't really find many people sort of having this idea. But the idea is that we're actually measuring things after they've happened. And we can't measure prevention. Prevention is really, really difficult to measure because actually nothing's happened. And so we need a way of being able to see the kind of black hole of prevention. And the story of this is about trying to drive a car by looking through the back window, and then wondering why you're seeing sort of cyclists and pedestrians sort of flying over the top of the car. It really doesn't make any sense when you when you look at it in the whole. Toby Lowe, he sort of gets a bit embarrassed whenever I tell him, but I think he's a bit of a hero of mine in terms of looking at prevention and metrics. And I think actually in terms of investigation, and he's very much connected with the Northumbria work, and the shout out to Ron Charlton, Mark Smith and others around the liberating method, and other people have gathered inspiration, and there is a growing momentum around what we're doing. But Toby's very, very in the weeds around prevention and how the metrics don't really work. The last quote there, really, impact isn't something that can be delivered. In fact, the whole delivery mindset is damaging and creating impact to creating impact in the real world. And there's quite a lot of evidence of metric gaming and all those types of things. So we need to be transparent and honest, and that's where we can come into difficulties in the system. So this is a bit of a kind of cartoon, really, and anybody that's seen Toby, Ron Charlton's work, Mark Smith's work in Northumbria, again, will sort of maybe recognise this from the writing from the liberating method. But when I first saw what they were doing, I just thought, my God, this is like the panacea of what we might have been wanting to try and achieve in terms of looking at prevention. And so sorry, I'm getting the words wrong. Ron was looking at over a 10-year period with two people, was where were they in the system and tracking them in minutiae detail. It's an absolutely incredible piece of work. And what they were able to prove was with an intervention at the right place. And with planned interventions, we were able to remove people out of the areas of unplanned hospital admissions, A&E, police, and so on. So that was the visualization of what they had, but it was incredibly complex. It was just two people. And so we thought, well, can we do this in a bit more of an aggregate way? So we're kind of stuck on this, and Martin and I and others were really looking at this in how do we do this? And we have very limited access to data, and this is the biggest sort of Achilles heel we've got, is the access to data. But we were able over time to start looking at this through the lens, originally, is cost-benefit analysis. And there are two things that we noticed around the cost-benefit analysis. One, there was a lot of the information that we were getting off of the case notes were not even recognised by the GMCA. And so we had to sort of think about, well, how much would that have cost? So things like safeguarding reviews and other things that may have not been in there. And we tracked some things, and quite quickly we noticed that actually in a lot of places the cost was more than if you included housing, if you included the things that were creating prevention. It was actually in the first instance more expensive and more complex, especially in the example of bringing somebody in who's homeless, who haven't used any services for the last sort of 15 years. All of a sudden they've got access to lots and lots of service, so it's actually more expensive. And of course, commissioners don't really like that. So there was a gap. So we started thinking about pressure as a currency. So started thinking about what kind of ways can we articulate as currency other than money, and that was things like time and expertise and estate and so on. And I'm going to show you the first pressure map that we came up with, and this is with somebody who's got an acquired brain injury, Brighton and Hove. And what and this is essentially, this is an SPC chart for those people that know statistical process. But as you can see on the left hand side of this graph, we've got rapid cycling of Ben going through, that's pseudonym, going through ambulance call outs, A&E attendance, scarf reports being written, and so on. And then when we've got a safeguarding plan that came in, this person came into a Change in Futures program, we can see that that suddenly sort of collapsed, became less frequent and became less crisis driven. And I'll come on to Ben a little bit later on, but that was the first one that we got that really got the attention. On the right hand side of this, you can see that we're looking at reactive, restricted, facility-based and specialist. And so what we had done is create an algorithm around those 4 items, and I'm going to show you a second one now, which is looking at somebody who came into our services, and it's a very simple attachment with a peer support worker. So this is a kind of trauma-informed intervention. It's very low pressure. But actually this person was repeatedly arrested, and then we can see when the intervention happens, then actually the arrests all go away. And of course, as we would know, if you are being arrested, that's a statistic. If you're not being arrested, that's not a statistic. So we're beginning to show this through process, and we can also relay that on costs. So in Natasha's example in West Sussex, we can see that the pre and post cost savings are quite significant. So we can pick and choose the ones that have great cost benefit analysis, but we can also look at the pressure pre and post as well through a bit of a currency scale. So this currency scale was working on the idea of a multiplier, which what we did is we set out an algorithm based on those 4 indices, and whether those things sort of multiplied against themselves. And we kind of ran it through most of the common interventions that our clients were seeing, from arrest down to peer support and eviction. And the sharp-eyed will see that eviction is there twice. And this is one of these things that we need to do future exploration around. I'll come to that in a second. Looking at the arrest as being the most high pressured, that's the most reactive. It's the most restrictive. It's using estate. It's a police car. It's 2 sort of police officers usually in that situation. And it kind of, when we were looking at this and we were testing it out with people that were looking at it, it seemed to make sense around, what has pressure and what doesn't. And with the inclusion of things like scarf reports, which are safeguarding reports, which aren't normally sort of tracked, we're then able to sort of really look into actually how much system activity is happening with individuals. And Martin's done a lot of the work, and he's going to come on to the actual sort of process. It's fairly easy input, and then the outputs are giving us these things to kind of look at. Now, eviction is in there twice, and low pressure. It's fairly low pressure for the system to deliver a letter to somebody and get them out. So there is sometimes an eviction can be a letter, you're out, because you don't have any power. Or you can have an eviction that requires some legal sort of process, and so then that's a higher pressure. So that's why that's in there twice. And again, it's up for further investigation. This is a prototype, and it's emerging learning. So going back over the last sort of year, we've refined this a bit more, and Martin's done a whole load of work on Power BI to try and get this to be able to articulate this in very simple ways to people, so they can look at this journey, they can kind of see things, they can see some figures, because people do like looking at figures. And this one, where we've extended Ben's pressure map, we can actually see that there's significant reductions over time around those urgent care services. There's a reduction in cost as well. And this person is now housed in the right place. And most importantly, we've managed to negotiate through all of this, is that Ben is now supported properly in the right place. However, Ben's statistics in urgent care will not be noticed. So we are reflecting this back to the high intensity user groups, the urgent care groups, and other people, to sort of show that we can demonstrate learning.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks for forwarding my slides on. That's really kind of you. So yeah, thanks, Louise, for going through some of the methodology. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is the impact that this has had for teams, because I think the really interesting thing that's come out of this is not only in terms of what I'm going to speak a little bit about what, the ways in which in Brighton and Hove particularly this has had an impact on the wider system, but how it impacts with the team as well that actually gather this data or input the data into the case management system. As Louise says, in order to get this information out of the system, I sit at the computer for a couple of days and plough through every single case note that this person has recorded against their name and make a tally chart of the different interventions that have happened. So it's quite a lengthy process, and so it's a big ask of the teams also, because we recognise that compiling a pressure map is a big ask. We're asking them to take time out of their frontline duties to assist with a task that is perhaps a bit ethereal or a bit strategic in nature, and that doesn't come natural to many frontline professionals. So it's a big ask. So we recognise that, and we recognise that and that's why we wanted to close the feedback loop, really, not only partly for us and partly for selfish reasons, because what we need to do is hear the stories that are behind the data points. What is it that's going on behind that pressure map you've just seen with Ben, the peaks and troughs? What is the story behind that? What is annotation can we put on this to make sense of what we're seeing? So that's a kind of a selfish thing, but also to reflect back to the team the work that they've done, because I think that's really key to kind of get an idea of where the individual teams are sitting with all this stuff. So essentially what we wanted to do is, in reflecting back, is to have these advantages that you can see there. So to really just gain further insight, but also to just begin to validate the staff experience. So I'll talk a bit in a minute about complexity and simplicity and how that's really important to acknowledge, I think, for teams, to celebrate successes that they've had with clients, like you've heard about Ben just a second ago. But there are other clients with whom there is great success, and there are clients in which the pressure map shows that the complexity continues after changing features and interventions as well. To identify sort of recurring wicked system issues that appear often, system barriers that kind of prevent our clients from moving forward and moving out of that cycle that Louise has spoken about, of going round and round in circles with services, but also to enable a bit of planning instead of firefighting. So to just begin looking to the future for individual clients rather than necessarily just being stuck in that loop. And the thing to note for teams is that impact is everything. They're not interested in cost savings, really. I mean, they're interested in cost savings in the sense that they can understand that that's what commissioners or in authority they want to see, but they don't. That's not their concern. They're more interested in the impact their work has had on the individuals they're working with, and so it's really important to begin to just translate some of that complexity into something simple that we can show the teams, but whilst acknowledging the complexity. Now that sounds like a contradiction in terms, and so what I thought I'd do is give you an example of what that might look like, and that's this. So this is the same graph that you've just seen with Ben, only this time what we've done is separate out each of the pressure pressure metrics into the individual interventions that make them up. So what we can see with Ben's example here is that simplicity of the pressure being high before changing features and low after changing features, but with the complexity of what makes that up. And this is really important because it helps the teams to see, to validate their experience and to see that actually, their work is being recognized as not just a simple fix. Because the problem with a linear graph is it displays something very simple, doesn't it? That's when the intervention began. This is when the pressure drops. And actually, the work that goes behind that is extremely complex. I'll talk about a particular example that's come out of the pressure mapping in just a second. But the work is so complex that it's often not seen that way. It's seen as a simple fix. We'll put into place this intervention, and this will lead to this result. And of course, the situation for the individual workers and the teams on the ground is that is a lot of work, a lot of complexity within that work. And you can see here from Ben's example, there's a great many sort of things happening. And the yellow parts, which I've highlighted in yellow, are around safeguarding. So we've got lots of incidents of safeguarding going on for Ben. The pale yellow, that is. And so most of those that are in the sort of part after changing features in the last couple of years, there's lots of safeguarding and lots of safeguarding reviews going on. And so there's constant work going on with Ben to just create a sense of stability and supervision for him, so that he gets the support he needs. And that's a multi-agency intervention, of course, so it draws together lots of partners into that safeguarding plan. So in validating the staff experiences, we've had many conversations like this one with a typical staff member. Yeah, that was a difficult time for Ben. I remember being frustrated that we couldn't seem to engage with him. So staff experiences with clients are reflected in the data, and that helps relieve the feelings of the staff members might feel that they're alone in this complexity, or that they're stuck in some way with that complexity. The teams often express, I was thought I was the only one feeling this way, and I think that's, it's part of team working is to actually reflect back this stuff so that we can actually get the team to begin thinking together about that common experience of feeling stuck with individual clients, or the frustrations that they're having with the barriers in the system. So it validates their experience and allows them to plan for the future, which I'll talk about in just a second. And to celebrate success as well. This is a conversation that I had with a worker when I was showing a pressure map. She's doing so well in her recovery. You can clearly see how much support she's had from the whole team. So it's very obvious to the individual workers that all the work that's gone in, the complexity that I've just highlighted, and that gives motivation. It means that they're having successes, and there are also, of course, always client difficulties as well. And some of the pressure maps show, that things aren't all, things don't get better in a linear way. They go up and down, and as we know, people move in and out of the system in various ways. So again, to highlight wicked system issues is another reason why we do this closing of the feedback loop. And this is a conversation I had with one worker. We had a real struggle getting the right accommodation for her. There's so little accommodation for women only locally. This person, they were talking about needed women only accommodation. Very, very little accommodation within the city of Brighton for women only, and so it's a discussion that led to a further conversation at a commissioning level, actually, about what women's accommodation there is in the city for those with multiple disadvantage. So again, a way for the worker to see that the barriers they're experiencing are having a further sort of influence on the system. To acknowledge distance travel, because as you've seen with Ben's been in adult social care for a good number of years, and working before changing futures, he was having multiple workers working with him at various points in his time, and so we can see the safeguarding work that we've done. That's loads of work, and it's acknowledging the kind of the sort of weight of work that's gone before with individuals to make a difference for them. And this is a really interesting one to plan for, to begin planning over kind of crisis management, firefighting. You can see he's in a loop. he disengages from support and ends up in A&E. Let's strengthen his care plan to encourage more regular engagement. I think it's a really interesting comment, and the ways that when I show the teams the pressure mapping stuff, they say, okay, we can see that's a recurring pattern there. Is there a way that we can do something differently to break that pattern? And this kind of thing, like strengthening a care plan or encouraging peer support engagement, engagement with lived experience, for example, is a way of breaking that cycle often. So it's really been interesting to reflect back to teams and enable that planning for individual clients. And I think as well, we need to, it's about supporting staff sense making, really. Why is it that it feels so pressured? As I've explained, the complexity of the work. And one of the really big anomalies that we've noticed in the pressure mapping is telephone calls. So the sheer volume of calls is really interesting. We've had some individuals individual workers who've been working with people and make 50 to 60 calls a week regarding that person. And so, as you can see, the pressure map is kind of skewed by the volume of telephone calls. Telephone call is a low pressure activity. It's 10 minutes on a phone, or it's 5 minutes on a phone, maybe even 2 minutes on a phone. But it's high staff pressure. It's a lot of work. 50 or 60 calls a week. That's a lot. So there's some work to do with the multiplier. And Louise and I have been talking about how we do, how we kind of cater for that in terms of the pressure. Is there a divisor that we need to apply to some categories, for example? But what it does show is the sheer volume of work that individuals undertake in their work with clients. So it gives a voice to the unseen work of the team. So when I show this to strategic leaders, I say, this again underlines the complexity and all the little bittiness of all the work that goes on with these individuals. But it also creates a sense of psychological safety with the team. They can see they're making a difference. They can see their efforts are being validated, not acknowledged and recognised, and used in strategic decision making, which is what I want to talk about next. So it's really interesting the ways we've used this work in Brighton and Hove to begin influencing system change for people with multiple disadvantage. So their delivery teams are way more agile than local authorities. So we've been able to change, as I've highlighted, practice. For example, safeguarding plans, we hold now much more robust safeguarding plans than we did at the start of the work of Changing Futures. Holding a central safeguarding plan with regular reviews, holding loads of multidisciplinary partners to account for the plan is a way that we found that works really effectively with individuals who have been stuck in the system for so long. It brings all of those partners together around that person in the kind of team around me model approach that we've adopted from Bristol Changing Futures, and actually begins to just make a difference for that person because there's this network of people around them to support them. There's also the kind of idea of prototypes into practice. So we're moving in Brighton and Hove from the Changing Futures model into a ICT, an integrated community team for multiple disadvantage, and this work has demonstrated the need for that greater interagency working across the system. And at the centre of that team is that the integrated community team is going to be the new Changing Futures team, which will be an enhanced care support team right at the centre. And it's a really interesting way that the city have decided to kind of build this multi-agency collaboration. And it's all been influenced by this work on pressure mapping, because we can see the interdependencies between the services that are happening on the ground with individuals and the results that's having when it comes to the difference it's making to the wider system. And then also we're trying to encourage system maturity, and one of the ways we have an aspiration for that is by joint commissioning. So essentially, as Louise has highlighted, the benefits of pressure saving often realised in other parts of the system. So adult social care, for example, in the example of our Changing Futures model, takes the brunt of the pressure, takes the brunt of the work, because that's where the work is most appropriately held, of course. But that means that there are less A&E appearances over here in the system. But what currently isn't happening is the system isn't linked enough to realise that pressure benefit of the increased pressure in adult social care against the decreased pressure in A&E. So what we're trying to do is draw all partners together, and begin just thinking, what's the ambition, what's the art of the possible in this, and is there a way that we can joint commission across sectors, in order to bring funding into a central pot, in order that we can support the work across the system, so that when adult social care bear the brunt of something and relieve the pressure in A&E, that there's some recognition of that in terms of funding and in terms of commissioning of services. So yeah, that's I think the next slide is mine as well, isn't it, Louise? I think actually, sorry, yes. So this is a kind of an aside, really. This is much more in the paper that Maud highlighted at the beginning of the session. There is a really good way of doing this with a very clear Excel sheet. It's simply an Excel sheet that produces all these things, and as I said, we fed it into Power BI, where we choose. This is the process that it follows. It's very simple. You add in the intervention, the date, and the number of times it happened, and all the rest of the pressure index, the multiplier that Louise spoke of, happens within the sheet. So it's a really clear methodology that's really quite simple. And if anyone's more interested in the kind of details of the machinations of the working of it, please do get in touch with me, because we can have a chat about that. So I think I'm going to hand back to Louise.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think obviously this hasn't been an easy ride. The system doesn't necessarily like sort of innovation as much as it thinks it does sometimes, and I think what's true in the system is that we have lots of structural issues around siloed budgets and misaligned incentives. And what I was talking about before is that if you're in conversations with A&E, they're going to be very different to conversations with voluntary sector organisation that knows what the hidden cost, especially if we're talking about trauma, and the nuances that go along with that. Culturally, there's a reluctance to share bad news. There's a fixation with KPIs, and anybody that's involved in any conversation I have around metrics, the more I understand about KPIs, the key performance indicators, actually, the more wrong they sort of appear to be. And there's a number of books on that subject, just around how the system ends up gaming itself in order to look like there's progress. And if anybody wants an example, if you Google shepherd tone and have a look at that on YouTube, the kind of sound, it's a very awful sound, but actually it describes what we mean by cycles of measurement where it's difficult to capture, and we end up just being in exactly the same place from when we started. So pilot projects with the KPIs, quite often by the time we get to the end of it, 2 years later, we might actually be in exactly the same position from when we started in the first place. Measuring prevention, as I said before, prevention is a bit like a black hole in cosmology. The only reason why we know black holes are there is because we can see what's around it. And I think one of the problems we have, the big wicked problems we have in data in the system, is that if something doesn't happen, we can't measure it. We end up measuring crisis, and therefore we end up with those types of things as ordinate drivers, which mean that we adapt our funding around measuring crisis, because that's what feels safe to measure. Relational problems, just around the way we are with different parts of the system. So there's lots of statutory organisations that will have an assumption that voluntary sector is endlessly absorbative. This sort of they can do this, and so there's quite a lot of assumptions and contradictions in the system. The voluntary sector can look after that. And yesterday I spoke with people from the Green Care Alliance, who are being sort of subjectively sort of defunded, from their roles, there's still an expectation for hospitals to use those resources, and so that kind of idea about voluntary sector is absorptive is really quite tricky. Linking stories and data. If you're able to do this, and I think with the where the pressure maps can work is not just about showing the pressure itself or where people are, it's actually putting in the caveats about what was happening for that person at the time, and that includes using quite a high level perhaps of qualitative of understanding what was going on with that person. So more narrative case studies can be really helpful. But I've interviewed a couple of our clients. They found that really helpful for themselves to be reflective around where they are in the system and what's going on for them. Yeah, building legitimacy, how to show pressure maps are rigorous. So what we need to do now as well is around that legitimacy. So when we're presenting this to people at the moment, it's a bit of a sideshow. It's a bit of a kind of, oh yeah, that's really nice, but we're doing all the important stuff over here. So one of the barriers we have is actually being able to build that sense of legitimacy. So there is an accusation with the pressure map as well. You just made it up. In some ways we did, and actually when you look at quite a lot of KPIs and other ways that we measure things, we just made those up as well. And then the invitation to test and learn. Amy Edmondson writes fantastically about failing successfully, for example, and the invitation to test and learn is also an invitation that we're not going to get it right the first time round, and we need to be confident, we need to be safe, we need to trust each other as a system to really be able to share things that are going to get us to where we need to go. Let's see what we got next. And of course, what I'm really invested in is really opening dialogue and conversation. So this is not work that's happened with just one person sitting on a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. And there's a big shout out to people that have helped drive the thinking, even if they're not fully aware that they have done. But we do convene learning communities. There is a data group, and we are sort of working together to share our ideas. And I think that's a really brave space to be for people to do that. So Nottingham have got some really good wins. Sam, I do see you on the call today, Sam, but big shout out to the work that you've done in Nottingham, just around the relational and the way that you can have a shared data and lean into spaces where you can get more and more information. Northumbria for the inspiration in the first place, really. And there's a bunch of other people. The Changing Futures program, I think it's about 15 sites. We get quite a lot of interaction with all of those people, so a big shout out for those people as well. And it's a continuing conversation, and what we'll do is invite people on this call, perhaps if they're interested in learning further. As Martin said, do get in contact with any of us, Maud as well, just around getting yourself on board with these ideas. You might have some new ones, fresh ones, you might have a critique, and actually critique is really good. So if you think this is all nonsense, tell us. It'd be really interesting to have that conversation about why that is as well, because it tests us, and we need to test. So we're sort of on the hour, which is fairly on time, I believe. So we want to have quite a lot of thinking really from yourselves, and these are some of the ideas you might think about. Does this resonate with work that you're doing? What parts of your system feel trapped in pilot mode, where you're just going round in circles and not trying to achieve a sort of escape velocity? What metrics do you wish you could use but you're not able to? Where is the system where is the wisdom hiding in your system? Quite a lot of the times, things that go unnoticed in the system, there's a lot of hard work that go on, and I think where we've been able to extrapolate the amount of telephone calls that go on, that's not recorded anywhere. Do your local metrics accurately describe the pressure of your local systems? And how is data used locally to prove efficacy of your service. So moving from efficiency to effectiveness, which I think is a movement that we need to go towards. So those are the questions I've got. I don't know if there's anything else more, Martin, before we hand back to the studio.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great. So hand back to the hosts. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, it's really interesting. And thanks for the offer for people to contact you to put their views forward. Louise, did you want people to put things in the chat box around those discussion points? Was that?
I mean, if people feel comfortable to talk, if they're able to, that will be fine. Or put them in the chat box. Either method is fine.
Okay, because we'll enable mics for people then to be able to look at those look at those points or answer those points. And we've got a few questions as well to put to you. Keely, are you okay just enabling the microphones?
Yeah, I've enabled Sandra's because she's got her hand up, so I don't know if you want to go to her before we get to questions. Up to you.
Yeah, we'll do it that way around. Yes, Sandra, have you got a question or a point in reflection?
A couple, please. To me, this is really, really exciting, and gosh, for a number of reasons. Question: are you working with NCC the university's UKRI funded work to research community work, essentially?
Yeah, not sure we're working directly with those people. There are some conversations we're having around things like social capital, environmental impacts as well. So that there is another side of this, which is looking at from the client focus, because this is a fairly blunt system instrument. So we have got an environmental kind of SPC as well that is a little bit less developed, but we're not working with those people that you've described.
Thank you, Sandra. If I go to a question, then if anyone else has got anything that they wanted to put forward in relation to the discussion points, then so the first question, it was one that came into the chat box, which you did respond to, Louise, but just in case people hadn't seen it, and it might be something that you want to expand on. So it was says, on overall pressure costs, I find different departments are not interested as they are concerned only where the cost of service lands rather than the overall system. This is obviously as they are protecting their budgets, which in social care, for example, are tight. How do we get over this when we have not pulled budgets? And I know, Louise, you'd said that this is one of the pieces of transformation that needs to be made. And if we can get over this hurdle, we will forever be in revolving. So we can't get over it, we'll be ever in revolving door loops for clients. So I don't know if you've got anything you wanted to expand on that, Louise, or with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think this is one of the problems we have, is the ability to actually work as an integrated care. I always think there's a bit of a contradiction quite often in the description. I'm doing quite a lot of work on language at the moment and how we describe things and the lack of comprehension of that. If we want to work in an integrated care way, we need to be able to share, and we need to be able to ask for help, and we need to be sort of transparent with things that we're struggling with, as well as things that we can celebrate. And I think we do. I think you're absolutely right. We do have these kind of silos and the internal drivers, and quite often you can hear things like, we've got to get our ducks in order first, before we enter a kind of collaborative. And actually the bravery it takes for organisations to jump into something and say, we're actually failing at this, we're struggling, can you help? Because the system is actually geared up to not hear that. And so with commissioning projects, in order for commissioners to feel safe, they would need to commission something where they understand they can very identify there's going to be some progress here, there's going to be some cost savings or money well spent, and that ends up being outputs quite often rather than outcomes when it comes to people who are receiving services. So in terms of transformation, a lot of the work that needs to be done is purely relational, and we're looking at structures far more than we're looking at relationships. It's being kind and compassionate to each other. It's not sort of going, oh, they're rubbish over there because, you know, look at them failing. It's like, actually they look like they need help. If I'm an organisation, a dream would be to say, actually, they're struggling. Let's go and see if we can help them. And if everybody did that, then then the system would start unravelling the exposure of actually the problem. And then it goes into actually, if we're using client-focused metrics and understanding the success through the client journey, we will then see what the solutions are we need to deliver. But that is a huge problem in the system for sure.
Thank you for that, Louise. Thank you for expanding on that. So the next question, it's for Louise and Martin. It asks, where do you source the CF baseline data from? Seems like a great methodology if you have a baseline, but hard to evidence change without this.
Yeah, perhaps I'll take that one, Louise. I think it's yeah, you're absolutely right. You need the data, and I think part of the limitations of what we've been able to do is that actually the data we have is only from adult social care. We don't yet have data. We have little bits and bobs that have been recorded in adult social care case notes. So, like for example, you know, the number of when a scarf report comes in, which is a police report about safeguarding an adult, that, you know, that gives me information about whether that person was arrested at that point or whether it was a police call out. It's those kinds of things. So we have incomplete information, and what we've been able to do a little bit, because we have a multidisciplinary team within Changing Futures auspices, is to get some of the detail from some of our partners within the multidisciplinary team, but that hasn't given us a full picture. So it's given us some of the data, for example, about A&E admissions. It's given us some of the data about how persons interacted with substance misuse services, but what it hasn't done is given us a full picture of the individual. So we're only looking at a part of the picture here, and I think the work that Northumbria did with that 10-year, those two individuals over 10 years, that was the kind of gold standard of this work. We're working within the constraints of what data sharing we have, and so yeah, so it is tricky. But the advantage we have is that me personally, I'm based in adult social care in Brighton, so I'm able to access the case management system. So I'm able to share that, use that, you know, anonymize that data and use it in this way. So it's about having the right people in the right place, but it's also about having the multidisciplinary team to get the data we can. And I think part of what the next part of the process, as Louise has just kind of hinted at, is to, you know, how to make this something which all agencies want to be a part of and are able to input data into in an anonymous way. So it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be individualized. It can be, you know, very much kind of pseudonymized before it comes to us. So yeah, so there's challenges there certainly, and it's yeah, we've got a particular set of circumstances within Changing Futures Sussex which has been quite helpful for this work, which not all Changing Futures areas have. So we're quite lucky in that sense.
Yeah, and we've also approached the Sussex integrated data set that are quite keen to work with this, and some of the other sort of actors are a little bit nervous about sharing data. So it's sort of a year on negotiations. We haven't got as far as we would like to with being able to do this aggregate. One of the reasons for us doing this in this way is that Northumbria did 2 people over a 10-year period. That's a kind of a study that took around 2 years, I think, to accomplish. And then it becomes, well, that was something that is historic. By the time it gets published, it's historic. And then it's, well, that's only 2 people. So that's some people might think that's anecdotal, or it's in Northumbria anyway. So what we're trying to do here is create a tool that can be used in a fairly democratic way, especially with voluntary sector organisations who could potentially, if they can get access to data, demonstrate their effectiveness within the system.
Oh, thank you, Martin and Louise, for that. The next question is for you again, Louise, and it asks around data systems and case records often aren't joined up across different services and organisations. How were you able to robustly identify contacts across different agencies over time, both pre and post intervention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word robust has come up a couple of times, and I wouldn't suggest that if this went to a panel, the data extraction would be seen as robust. We have, as Martin said, we have limited access to data. Changing Futures programme, I think, across the 3 localities, used 7 different data sets available to them with their partners, and we sometimes, as an example of e-Sussex, perhaps you've only got data to adult social care record. We don't have data for anything else. So as Martin said, you know, pulling the data out of things like SCARF reports is where we're at. So you know, the scrutiny of this in terms of a learning journey is that we've got as far as we can get with the maximum amount of data we have. This could be far richer if we could get other pieces of data to join up to it, but it's also able to highlight the data gaps. So one of the pressure maps we have in eSUSSEX is actually, you know, we just got to, you know, social care in of itself have got a big black hole around understanding what's going on here, because there's literally no data that's attached to the work that's happening in that localized area.
Sorry, can I jump in? I know that question was for Louise, but I think I just wanted to, because I think they're all quite related, aren't they? But I suppose it's important to reiterate the like value of trust, and sort of like trust as a metric throughout this entire project and the approach. And I think it's why swim lanes kind of began with a real focus on costings, and then has had to broaden out and evolve past using all these different systems thinking theories, because actually the tool only works if the system has these kind of healthy indicators of trust and collaboration and partnership. And so it functions better if that exists. So then I think trying to bring people on and get them to understand that this is part of our work, and that the pressure mapping can kind of objectively point out what different services could be doing, need to be doing, shouldn't be doing. I think it's all part of this process of trying to like build up trust both in the system's pressure mapping but also within services. So yeah, the data is sort of only as good as the local system allows it to be.
Oh, thank you, Maud and Louise. So the next question says, going back to the point at the beginning with planned cost and unplanned cost, has the service pressure by intervention work been broken down to know which interventions are planned and which aren't? The list of interventions to me looks like it includes both, but think this could be a good opportunity to demonstrate positive impact of investment in time and resource for planned interventions on reduction of unplanned, and then in brackets, and often more costly, close brackets, interventions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the advantage of Power BI is we can slice the data exactly how we want to. So yeah, we can definitely do that, and we have done that. The difficulty we've found is that often the number of unplanned interventions are so high. Sorry, the number of planned interventions are so high that the cost saving is negligible or non-existent. So actually, in terms of cost saving, that's part of the reason why we began to move from the cost saving analysis into the pressure saving analysis, because we found that the 2 lines didn't necessarily correlate. I think Louise can talk a bit more about that, but I think, you know, the essential thing was, yes, we can do that, definitely. And for some clients, it shows a very clear, you know, the unplanned cost is much higher than the planned cost, but for many, it's the opposite, actually. So it's really interesting that, you know, you can see all of that data within Power BI and slice it any way, which way you want.
We've also got on the Excel spreadsheet, we've also got planned, unplanned. So we've got 3 axes. We've got planned, unplanned, statutory, non-statutory. What's the other one? Remind me. Brain's just gone.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Unplanned. Oh, statutory, non-statutory. So we can also slice it through the Excel spreadsheet around what we've considered to be planned and unplanned, and take that out of the data to describe that, which goes back to the original kind of swim lane piece, you know, where you can put different intervention into the right kind of lanes.
Thank you both for that response. So the next question says, there seems to be a lot of different methods or structures for multidisciplinary meetings. You mentioned teams around me, for example. Do you think we need a consistent standard to do to MDT, or maybe principles about effectively working together, particularly something around the barriers, tensions, miscommunications that exist between statutory and non-statutory services? And plus where power lies is taken up. Is this a nut that you've cracked?
We can both talk to that, I think. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the nut is in the nutcracker, but it's not necessarily cracked. I think that's the best way to describe it. I think within Brighton, because of this ICT development, that is underpinned by a compact agreement, which has in it a set of principles of joint working. And those are based on the team around me model that Bristol Changing Futures began, and other compact agreements that we've managed to sort of steal, borrow, beg from other local authorities. And so there is a kind of a shared understanding of what multidisciplinary working looks like within the ICT. Now, one of the first tasks the ICT did was to sit down and list all of the multidisciplinary meetings within the city, and there were many, 20 odd. And so there's duplication of work going on all over the place. And so there is something about, what the ICT wants to do is to decrease the number of meetings, to centralise some of those meetings, to bring individual organisations into better collaboration across those meetings, but abided by the principles that are set out in the compact agreement of mutual understanding and trust and communication and all those things you talk about, power dynamics. They're all within that sort of agreement, and I'm happy to share that agreement if people would like to see a copy, because I think that's the kind of key to working out where the work needs to happen. At the moment, it's so spread out across the city in these different meetings, all in dealing with often with the same individuals, talking about the same people in one meeting here, and then the next day having a conversation in another meeting. So it's about centralising that under this ICT structure, underpinned by this compact agreement, which has very clear guidelines on how to work together as a multi-agency forum.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the second thing as well is around moving towards values-based commissioning and sort of principle-led ways of working, which will lead me on to trauma-informed practice, because I think working with clients in a trauma-informed practice way is sort of paramount, but also actually working with their workforce in a trauma-informed way. Trauma-informed safety, trust, collaboration, empowerment, and choice are good principles to work with in terms of team, organisation and system. And I've been using trauma-informed practice as the kind of the county lead for it, if you like, in using that as a Trojan horse for better, compassionate ways of working, where we're able to be open and transparent with each other, to fail successfully. Go back to Amy Edmondson, but also think about trust. The thing we don't measure the most is trust, but we actually need trust the most, which is a really interesting paradox that we've got in the system. And there's a book by Stephen Covey, We Move at the Speed of Trust, Grow at the Speed of Trust. Very good book to read. Just as if you think that your system is stuck, it's probably because you don't trust each other. And that's a systemic issue, which then moves itself into team and individual.
Thank you for that. And someone's just put a comment in the chat that says it'd be really helpful to see the agreement, if that's okay. It sounds similar to what we are trying to do in Sheffield.
Yeah, by all means.
Thank you. So the next question says, for local authorities without a Changing Futures project, how do you simply begin to count or estimate the number of people experiencing severe and multiple disadvantage in those localities?
I think what we've been able to do in Changing Futures programme, and the programme lead Joe Rogers has been leading some work on really understanding the profile of multiple compound need in the area, and we virtually doubled the amount of known people with multiple compound need. And again, this is sort of, rather than sort of saying, aren't we doing well, we've only got 11 homeless people in Brighton and Hove. is actually to say, actually this is the true figure, but also knowing that there are also things that we don't know as well. So far what we can understand is that there are this many people who are homeless in the city, for example, but we know it's likely to be more than that. I think it's just being able to step away of what are we trying to achieve with what we're trying to count, linking in with the joint strategic needs assessment, building relationships with public health. I know recently Thurrock have been doing a piece of work on very, very similar ground to this. Lincolnshire have also, the ICB in Lincolnshire with Victoria Townsend, they've been doing some work on theograms, which are the same really as swim lanes, and they've actually got a sort of data piece there. It's about, for me, it's like knowing your tribe. The first sort of way of moving forward is trying to find someone else in your area that's trying to do the same thing, and link up with them and see if you can build a coalition and build a bit of a conversation around this, because there will be people in your system that will be wanting to do this as well.
Yeah, I think there's... Sorry, go on, Maud.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, I would also say that sort of there's 15 changing futures areas, but every area arguably in the UK is working on multiple disadvantage. It may not just name it as such. I suppose the meme works with the meme approach areas, and I think there's over 55 now at the moment in England. So those are areas that are not changing futures areas. They don't have the changing futures money, but they are dedicated to supporting people experiencing multiple disadvantage. So there's lots of resources and there's lots of good work in areas of innovation that aren't dependent on that changing futures money. So yeah, please get in touch to find out more.
Yeah, just to mention a couple of particular methodologies. Louise mentioned the joint strategic needs assessments, which have happened in pretty much all of Sussex now around multiple disadvantage, because it's a bit of a hot topic. Alongside that, we run a multiple needs audit, so that's through the local homeless providers, to find out those particular individuals who are experiencing homelessness and multiple disadvantage, so that gives us an insight. And so we were able to do that across, because obviously changing futures have been able to do that. But what we've managed to secure, certainly in Brighton, is the other thing is the multiple compound needs boards that we've established in the three Sussexes, East, West and Brighton and Hove, which are kind of like a governance structure to actually take forward the work of multiple compound needs, and their commissioning. And certainly in Brighton, it's that body that's commissioning that multiple needs audit going forward after Changing Futures ends. So there'll be a continuance of the data gathering around individuals, but through that multiple needs board. And those boards, I think, are quite key to the strategic sort of direction and travel within this work, because without that, you don't get strategic needs assessment, you don't get all the other things that come with it, the drive to innovate in this area. So I think that's one of the kind of advantages we've had, is that a multiple needs board that we've been able to set up and establish in the different Sussexes.
Yeah, that makes me think about people that read stuff around this. Peter Drucker talked about culture eating strategy for breakfast, and that was a thing that we were rolling out a few years ago as the kind of the new sort of talk in town. A, he didn't quite say that, and B, that's not quite true, because Caroline Evans, I think it was, talked about actually they're all snacking on structure, and what we can do this as a very exciting sort of learning program and so on, but it cannot exist without structure. And I'm not a structure person particularly, but we need to work in combination with building new structures within the existing kind of places that we are, in order to manifest this properly and make sure that we've got some accountability around trust and accountability around those values. Otherwise, this will also fail at the same time. So very much and with.
Thank you for that. So the next question asks, once you have the data from adult social care case notes, is it a case of plugging into the Excel tool that is based on a national research? Do you have any input into pressure ratings or costs?
So the process is much less technical than plugging it in. It makes it sound like it just sort of happens automatically. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It literally is me plowing through the individual notes and then putting it into the spreadsheet. So it's data entry, which is a dull task, but one that the results are self-evident and much more gratifying. But I talked about the validation of the staff experience and the frontline teams. This kind of discussion is validating my experience of sitting for 3 days with 2 spreadsheets open, going through every individual line. So, which is great. Yeah, it is a laborious task currently. There's no automation of that task, but then there's also the second part of your question in terms of pressure rating and costs. The costs have come from that GMC database largely, and as I think Louise mentioned earlier, some of the costs weren't there, like things like scarf reports or safeguarding concerns, that kind of thing. So we've kind of just chatted to people who are involved in those things and actually got an idea and had the best estimate that we can do for some of those other costs. And in terms of the pressure, I'll let Louise speak to the algorithm and how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, inputting the data, which I did in East Sussex, it showed me the fallibility of the input mechanism becoming just a word salad to other people that are trying to extrapolate data. So I mean, the dream would be being able to have a national tool, I suppose, where people can input this data. It goes in at aggregate. So then it can be combined, so then you've got got a permanent ability to have cost benefit applied and to have the pressure map applied, and for it to produce the statistical process charts that we've showed, and for you to better slice this is possible. But it does mean nationally people are coming together and making a common agreement about what we're going to use. Like I said before, the Changing Futures programme is using 7 different data sets across Sussex. It's manyfold. I mean, I don't think anybody actually has any idea of how many there are, because they're always procured in silos. Websites are procured in silos. So conversation recently in Brighton Hove about getting another mental health website. It's like, well, we've already got 15 of them. So why don't we make the ones we have better? Why don't we reduce them into one really, really good functioning one that everybody's invested in, rather than multiple ones, because people see the project as the kind of alternate driver of the work.
Can I just say on sort of unit costs, like I suppose the unit cost, so the Greater Manchester Combined Authority CBA, like that is the best national figure. That's kind of like a best guess. And of course, like as Louise and Martin are saying, it changes locally. But I think that focusing so heavily on cost, you're kind of chasing something that is endless. And we know that financial cost alone doesn't prove the case, and it's really difficult to assign an accurate cost to an experience or an intervention that someone is having. And I think that's why, again, like the approach had to be more broad than just these are the unit costs, because I think people who agree with the unit costs will say, okay, great, it seems like you're making a cost saving to our service. Perhaps the cost is going somewhere else. But you can easily kind of scientifically debunk the cost and say, well, that's not actually the cost of that, or there's holes in it financially, at least as far as we've seen it. So you have to take that both and or and with approach, because otherwise you don't have a robust enough argument. And I think the unit costs, like as a best guess, are okay. I think they suffice to make the case. So yeah, that's kind of the but it's worth checking out the Greater Manchester work, because it's comprehensive, and there's unit costs for every kind of major sector that might impact somebody experiencing multiple disadvantage. So it's relevant and it's useful, but yeah, it can't be the only thing that we're looking at.
Thank you all for that. So I think Martin's just answered a question that was in the chat about whether it's changing futures data or all data, but it's just changing futures data. And then just one comment that was in the chat around collaborative CIC and the British Science Association are beginning a discussion about stewardship-based governance and accountability and collaborative working between public and voluntary sectors. And it's just saying that your approach would be central to this. So just to flag that.
I have spoken with Collaborative CIC a little while ago, and there are a number of people that are working on the same thing. So I'm a member of the Q Foundation, and especially around the systems convening work, where so if you go on the Q Foundation website, Google that, using sort of human learning systems, liberating structures and different things, which can, again, it can feel quite odd to people. The criticism, if you find the actual problem, can take months to find, rather than just an assumption of, well, we just need to fix this. It's like, actually, when you go through a human learning system process and a liberating structure, you probably find actually the root cause is not entirely what you think it is, especially if you're working across a system. And some people really don't like working with that complexity. But the collaborative, as mentioned, I haven't got any links with the other one. That's a new one on me. But I think also we need a collaboration of the collaboratives as well, and the network of networks, and again, there's another book, Team of Teams, I think it's Ali McChrystal writes, just around the power of networks and just how powerful it is to pull people together. But of course, we're all kind of competing as well, because we all want a little limelight, and the kind of, actually, I'm working hard as well. So there's also a tension within the collaborative spaces of models, because when you look at the models, they're all roughly the same. They're iterative, they're prototyping, they're using continuous improvement, but there's many different ways of describing virtually the same thing. So the more we notice each other, the more we can support each other and talk to each other, then I think the stronger the narrative around moving towards liberating structures and human learning systems will be possible.
Thank you. And that was pretty much perfect timing. So it's just, coming up to 11:30 now. Thanks again, Louise, Maud and Martin, for presenting and taking the time out to do so today. It's been, really interesting.